Good evening, everybody. This is Paya Levine. I'm the Assistant Planning Director with the County of Santa Cruz. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to David for starting the recording. And we did have a second link that was sent for the meeting, and apparently it worked because so many of you are here. We did that in order to accommodate people who are going to be on the phone who don't have computer access. But what that means is we're still scooping up stragglers who went to the first link. And so let's give it just a couple minutes before we start so that they can join us as well. So thank you all for your patience with that. I really appreciate it. So I think it's a good time to start. David, are you ready for that? David Reed for doing the support?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So again, thank you all very much for coming. There are 40 plus people in the meeting, and that's really great. I did put the link for this meeting in the chat, and you can share that if there are others you're aware of who wish to be here and didn't get the fact that the link changed. But we do have somebody at the original link who is kind of playing in the outfield and scooping up anybody who went there. So I do hope we'll all get to the right place. So this meeting tonight is about specifically limited density owner built rural dwellings, which is also known as the K code. And this is one of several programs that the board has put together and directed the planning department to work on to address various challenges with rebuilding after the fire. This is, one specific piece of many different activities and actions that the county's been taking. And I'm just looking forward to presenting it to you, and we'll introduce the team and go from there. A significant part of tonight is devoted to hearing from you. We're interested in getting your input and feedback on what's being proposed. So we'll limit our presentation so we can leave the bulk of the time to hear from you. David Carlson, can I have the next slide? I'm going to introduce at this point David Reed. David is staff in the new Office of Resilience, Recovery, and Response. And he'll say a few words and also talk with everybody about the protocol so that we can all move through the meeting in a smooth way. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Paya. Before I go through the meeting protocols, I wanted to just give you a quick update on the Office of Resilience, Recovery, and Response. Has been created by Supervisor Coonerty and McPherson in an effort to support all of you through your rebuild and recovery journey. And we recognize that that has got many aspects to it. So there is additional resources above and beyond the rebuild process that are available to you, and through the county website. The new office of the OR3 office will be a conduit to some of those resources. But before I begin the meeting protocols, I do want to just take a moment to honor the traumatic experience that all of you went through this last year, and the fact that the one fatality of the CZU Lightning Complex fire came from your community. And you all knew probably Tad Jones well. And so I just want to take a brief moment to recognize that hard experience and that trauma, and honor the journey that you've been through so far. And hopefully we can help you in the journey the rest of the way. So for tonight, just to review the meeting protocols, we are recording it so that it'll be available on our county website under the events tab, the fire recovery website. We're going to try and keep everybody muted to prevent background noise. We're going to hold the question and answer at the end of the presentation, so we'll let you know when that happens. And there's 2 ways that you can ask questions. In the upper part of your screen, there's a little hand and face, and you can raise your hand. If you have a question, you can type your question into the chat, and there's a little kind of conversation bubble at the top that you can type your question into the chat. And then I see that there are 6 of you joining us, or 7 of you joining us by phone. And if you're on your phone and you have the capability of emailing, you can email me at david.reid, R-E-I-D, at santacruzcounty.us. So that's david.reid, R-E-I-D, at santacruzcounty.us if you're on the phone. And if you have a question and you email me, I'll try and get that into the conversation to get answered as well. And then after the meeting, we'll have Marty Heaney, our chief building official, as well as Paya and David Carlson to help answer questions. And with that, we'll go to the next slide and I'll hand it back to Paya.
Actually, this is my opportunity to introduce David Carlson. He's the planner in the planning department that is putting together the proposed K code. So he will go through the agenda.
David, you muted.
I think you're going to
Thank you.
need to go to that other one. They won't hear you in this meeting. I see Sharon Smith. I will take care of you.
Okay, I think I'll jump in here. So here's the agenda for tonight. And my name's David Carlson. I'm a resource planner in the planning department. And you've already heard from Paya Levine, who is the assistant planning director here tonight as well. We're joined by Marty Heaney, who is the chief building inspector for the county, as well as Dr. Marilyn Underwood will be available, and she is the director of the Environmental Health Services Department here at the county. And here's the agenda for tonight. We'll have a welcome from Supervisor Coonerty, and then we've already had the introductions to the meeting protocol. I'll go over some of the background on the K code, the history, you know, the board direction to us, and the differences between, well, just kind of some comparisons between the building code and the K code, and then just some high level key details regarding the K code. And I wanted to acknowledge and appreciate the input so far from local residents of the Last Chance area for providing us with your version of a potential K code. And then last, we'll go over some coastal zone considerations before we get into questions and discussion. So I think I'll stop sharing my screen at this point. And there, we're back. Do we have Supervisor Coonerty available?
Yeah, I'm right here. Thank you. So I just want to take a moment and welcome everybody. My name is Ryan Coonerty. I'm a 3rd District County Supervisor, which means I represent most of Santa Cruz, Bonnie Doon, and then up the North Coast, all the way to Last Chance in the San Mateo County line. This meeting is a product of a direction that sort of came from the community. Malia Powell contacted our department, my office, and wanted to explore a different permitting system under state code. And I brought a direction to the Board of Supervisors that we use Last Chance as a pilot to see if we can implement something like that here in order to make rebuilding more possible and easier for all of you after everything you've been through. I just want to take a second and appreciate that the planning department, Paya Levine and the planning department have been very responsive in trying to reach out and look at all the different options from around the state. and then Dave Reed in the office of OR3, the new office we've created to focus on rebuilding and get resources to people in need, has also been great at pulling people together. And so tonight's a chance to sort of talk about what's available under the state code, and what some options are, and then most importantly, get your feedback. But I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We have a great turnout, and I think it's going to be incredibly valuable to hear your perspectives.
Okay, thank you for Supervisor Coonerty. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. And we're back. Okay, what is the K code? Our understanding is the K code was originally developed in the 1970s as Appendix K of the building code at that time to accommodate homesteaders and the Back to the Land movement. I believe that was initiated in Mendocino County at that time. It was intended to provide minimum requirements for low-cost owner-built structures in remote mountainous locations in mild climates where access to conventional construction materials and contractors was difficult, while also ensuring that reasonable health and safety standards are met. The K code was also intended as a response to local conditions, and in our case, the K code is being considered as a way to help fire victims rebuild and recover. It is an alternative building code and does not specifically authorize alternatives. It's an alternative building code, and it doesn't specifically authorize alternatives to the fire code or sewage disposal or water supply requirements. It's limited to alternative building construction requirements under the purview of the building official, and doesn't affect the requirements enforced by county fire department or environmental health services. We understand in the last chance area that meeting fire access standards and septic and water standards may be constraints to rebuilding. However, we're not able to address those in this construction code. The K code is part of addressing the obstacles to rebuilding with permits in the last chance area, and it covers the constraints that the county has the authority to address. So last November, a report to the Board of Supervisors addressed programs and changes to assist replacing burned homes that were built without permits. The board directed staff to implement a legacy older structures program within the CZU burn area to confer legal non-conforming status for sites documented to have been developed prior to 1986. However, it's important to point out that this is not necessarily a golden ticket to reconstruction. Even though the prior home would be considered as legally established, basic requirements for road access and septic or alternate septic disposal and other buildability requirements still must be met. The board directed the Office of Response, Recovery, and Resiliency to research ways to facilitate rebuilding in these areas with common obstacles to rebuilding on individual parcels, such as substandard road access, for example. A fire area improvement reconstruction program approach would involve a collective response to solving common problems involving road infrastructure, bridge improvements, or water storage. We don't have additional information on that effort tonight, but it's potentially a piece of the puzzle for rebuilding in the last chance area. And then finally, the board approved the development of the limited density owner-built rural dwellings ordinance as a pilot project in the last chance area. And we'll be referring to that as the K code based on that history because it's just an easier way to refer to it than that long title in state law. So what is the difference between the California Building Code and the K code? Local jurisdictions are required to adopt Title 24, the California Building Standards Codes, and any local amendments must be more restrictive than Title 24. And this is just a partial list of some of the codes that are in Title 24. The fire code is included in the California Building Standards codes, but it's adopted separately by each local fire agency and enforced by those fire agencies. There's no longer an Appendix K of the building code, and the provisions for low-density owner-built rural dwellings are now located in state law as part of Title 25 of the California Code of Regulations. We're not required to adopt regulations we're not required to adopt a K code, but if we do adopt a K code, we must make findings that it's reasonably necessary because of local conditions, and we have those. If we make changes or modifications to the K code regulations in state law, we must also make findings that they're reasonably necessary because of local conditions, and any amendments to Title 25 or the K code portion of Title 25 must be equivalent or more restrictive, but not less restrictive. So this is just an outline of the next several slides we'll review some of the major areas of the K code, including definitions of rural and owner built. We'll get into record keeping and the plans and the codes themselves. And I'll start that off with just a map here of the applicability and of the parcels in the last chance area. The light blue outline parcels are privately owned, and according to county damage assessment records, had at least one structure and often more destroyed in the fire. The dark blue lines are local creeks, with Scott Creek drainage located to the right of the last chance area and Waddell Creek drainage to the left. And the darker green parcels are parcels that are owned by state parks. So the titles of the next several slides reference the relevant section of state law, and the discussion will include local considerations, including some information on the residents' proposal, and then county staff thinking on some of these major issues. State law language on applicability is very general and simply states that it applies to limited density owner-built rural dwellings. In the residents' proposal, we noted language that would apply the regulations to existing and proposed structures in the fire impact area. And because this effort is intended to help fire victims, staff might recommend the K code apply only to parcels that had structures that were destroyed in the fire. And the direction from the board was to consider a pilot project for the last chance area. Other considerations include legal parcels with a zoning designation that would allow for residential use. And the difference here between the California building codes and the K code is, of course, the California building codes apply across the board to any structure built throughout the county, and the K code would only apply in certain rural areas that are designated. The state law includes definitions for these key terms, and the residents' proposal also includes these definitions with several key amendments that staff agrees with for the most part. In the definition of owner built, staff might recommend that prohibition on sale, lease, or rent be extended to 3 years instead of 1 year. And in the definition of rural, in order to limit the application of the K code to a pilot program in the last chance area, staff might recommend the definition be narrowed to those parcels identified in the last chance area that had a structure destroyed in the fire. And again, the difference here is that the K code applies to structures just in certain areas, and the building code applies throughout the county. The state law does provide that the county can require a deed recordation, including information regarding the materials, the methods of construction, the alternative facilities, or other factors that may be of value in full disclosure of the nature of the dwelling and appurtenant or accessory structures. The residents' proposal doesn't include this provision, but county staff would recommend including it for full disclosure that the structures and facilities on a particular parcel have been constructed under an alternative code and may not conform entirely to all the requirements in the California building codes. and has received fewer building inspections than would normally be required. The California Building Code doesn't require a deed recordation because normally a structure built with a permit is assumed to fully comply with the California Building Codes and all the building components have been inspected. And that's not going to necessarily be the case under the K Code, and it's important to disclose that on the property deed. The state law contains a list of basic information needed for the application for a permit under the K Code, and a description of the type of plans that are required. The difference here is that a permit application and the required plans for a permit under the California building codes would require a much more detailed set of plans and typically structural calculations and energy calculations. And county staff envisions developing a simplified list based on our standard list of required information for these applications under the K Code. For structures of complex design or unusual conditions, we may require additional information from a professional engineer or architect to support the design and how it would meet the basic intent of the California building codes. In addition to the basic information listed in state law, the county would require pre-clearances from both environmental health and the fire agency to ensure the application is viable and that we should accept it. And Title 16 of the county code requires projects to protect the environment as much as possible and avoid hazards. And as with all applications for replacement homes, a site visit would occur by our environmental planning staff to check for those environmental resources and constraints, such as landslide hazards, unstable soil conditions, proximity to water resources, and other conditions that might pose either a potential hazard or to protect the environment. And during this part of the review, we would also determine if a soils report would be required or if a waiver of that requirement is appropriate. The state law provides for inspections or a waiver of inspections for certain types of structures. For dwellings, the county staff would suggest a minimum of 4 inspections to verify the major components of the structure, including the foundation, the underfloor, the frame, and the frame is where if there's any plumbing, electrical, or mechanical components in the building, those are looked at before they're covered up with wall coverings. And then a final inspection. Normally, a house would require, under the California Building Standards codes, would require up to 8 inspections. The residence proposal does incorporate the provisions in state law providing for ingenuity and preferences of the builder and alternatives to the specifications prescribed in the California Building Standards codes to the extent that a reasonable degree of health and safety is provided by those alternatives. And county staff would recommend adopting the same language. And this section of state law highlights, the challenge for the county. It's almost contradictory because it states the K Code structures need not comply with the California Building Code, but the California Building Codes must be respected and are the basis for approval. However, as noted earlier, the focus will be on sound structural condition and safe and sanitary conditions for these structures. For structure types that have no basis in the California Building Standards codes, it's likely that county staff would ask for a professional engineer to demonstrate sound structural conditions, for example. The residence proposal does include additional provisions addressing construction requirements, or additional construction requirements, and county staff has not yet decided whether all or some of those provisions should be recommended in the version of the code we present to the board. State law requires that if fireplaces, heating and cooking appliances, and gas plumbing are installed, that those be installed and vented in accordance with the current version of the California Mechanical Code. And we also agree with the residents' proposal that a source of space heating should be required be it passive solar or some other form of space heating. However, county staff might recommend that if the heat source uses non-renewable energies such as propane, then the structure does need to be insulated in accordance with the California Energy Code, which requires energy calculations for the structure. The difference here is that the California building codes require a heat source that can maintain a structure at a certain temperature, and insulation and energy calculations are required regardless of the fuel source. K-code structures can use passive solar or wood heat, and they don't necessarily have to be insulated or complete energy calculations. State law doesn't require K-code structures to be electrified, and that's a big difference between the K-code and the California Building Code. The residence proposal follows the state law. County staff would recommend that if wiring is installed, and if we determine that the electrical demand of the structure or proposed use requires additional wiring, we would require it. We would also require smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors as a basic safety feature. The residence proposal also includes a provision that generators shall be enclosed in a sound reduction enclosure. County staff would recommend specifying that generators could be used as an emergency backup power, but not as a sole source of power. And then the state law provides the plumbing shall comply with the California Plumbing Code, but it doesn't really address any specific requirements for plumbing. However, obviously, toilet facilities are going to be required, and they're going to be required to be hooked up to an individual sewage disposal system. At this point in time, the county environmental health does not have the authority to approve alternatives that are not provided for in our local sewage disposal ordinance. An alternative such as the use of composting toilets without a septic system would require approval from the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. And the county staff would recommend that the K-code ordinance specifically require bathing and washing facilities. And then I just wanted to briefly go over just the separate requirements in addition to the K-code. Some of these I've already talked about. Of course, the Title 2016 Environmental Protection Regulations, the Fire Code, and the Sewage Disposal Ordinance. We also have County Code Title 13, the Planning and Zoning Regulations. So these structures would be required to meet the basic zoning regulations, including setbacks and height and lot coverage and that sort of thing, which we don't necessarily envision as a problem because most of these parcels are, multiple acres in size. And then we have the Chapter 13.20 Coastal Zone Regulations, which apply in this area. And I'm going to turn it over to Paya Levine now to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, David. This is a slide a map showing the coastal zone. And as you can see, Last Chance Road is almost entirely within the coastal zone. The icons are, the colored icons are places where a structure was damaged or destroyed. So you can see the coastal zone is a fact of life for the Last Chance area. Next slide, please. And really, all I want to say about this is just acknowledge that you are in the coastal zone, and what that means is that some of your projects will require coastal permits. There are several exemptions and exceptions in the Coastal Act that will apply to many projects, but they won't apply to all projects. And the way to tell whether you're going to need a coastal permit or not is to connect with the Recovery Permit Center. We haven't talked about the Recovery Permit Center yet, but that is the separate dedicated processing place for fire recovery permits. So there's a staff there that is dedicated to doing a streamlined process for recovery permits. And part of what they do is they're extremely available to you. So what I would suggest is everybody really, when you're first thinking about how you're going to go forward, to do I think they call it pre-application screening with the Recovery Permit Center staff. They'll do a video call with you for half an hour or an hour, and begin to understand your specific site conditions and your project and your questions. And they make themselves available as many times as you need that kind of a conversation or meeting. So if you do need a coastal permit, they will help you work through it. And not all of you will, but I just wanted to acknowledge that that is a factor in addition to the building permit. Next slide.
Okay, that concludes our presentation. Now we want to get into the questions and discussion part of this meeting, and also show you the contact information from the folks that we have here tonight, Paya, Marty, myself, and the Recovery Permit Center. I can either leave this up as we go through questions and discussion, or whatever the preference is of the group here.
We can leave it there for the time being, I think. That way folks have a second. We can reference the RPC.
Okay.
And then as a reminder to everybody on the call this evening, there's two ways that you can ask a question. There's the chat function. So that's that little bubble with the lines that says show conversation. You can click on that and type a question into the chat. The other thing you can do is raise your hand. So if you go up to the top, there's an ability to raise your hand, and that'll put you in the queue, and then I can call on you and raise your hand, and then you can ask your question of staff. And then for those of you on the phone, again, if you're on the phone and have access to the internet, you can email me. My email address is david.reid, R-E-I-D, at santacruzcounty.us, and I can try and get your question in. So right now, we don't have any questions. So is there somebody who'd like to kick us off with the hand raised?
Got a picture.
All right, Robin. Yeah, you raised your hand, Robin. I think if you'd like to ask your question.
My question is about money. From what I understand, this isn't going to be cheap. I already talked to one neighbor, said that it's costing $1,100 just to have them, that first little thing that they're talking about with the RPC, and how many clearances you have to get before you can go through. So yeah, money, because we didn't bring this on ourselves. The state brought this on us. So this is going to cost us a lot of money, and some of us don't have a lot of money. So how is there any way the county can let some of this go as far as permit cost?
Thanks, Robin. We're gonna let Paya answer that, and then just one more reminder. We're gonna try and let everybody ask one question, and then if others have multiple questions, we'll get to that. So I'm going to mute you right now, Robin, and then have Paya answer.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Robin. And we hear that, widespread. So yes, cost is definitely a factor. I think it's a factor for almost everybody who's in your position. The board has reduced fees and waived fees where they could. And when you do get to the point of making your application and getting a building permit, at the end of that day, the building permit should be, around 25% less than the usual cost. The clearances that you're talking about, there are 3 of those, and they do have fees. For example, the environmental health fee is the same fee that would be in effect, anytime you needed to work on your septic system. It's certainly not more. And the services of the Recovery Permit Center, specifically the pre-application screening or any time they spend with you in meetings, none of that has a cost associated with it. So I just want to acknowledge that, yes, this is turning out to be an expensive business, it's definitely a challenge. And we've made changes to fees where we could and still be able to support the Recovery Permit Center as a resource for people.
Thanks, Paya. We have a couple questions in the chat. So I'm going to start with one regarding, will Planning Department help Last Chance approach the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board? I think that's what the letters are, regarding the issue of permitting or approving composting toilets. And for that, I wanted to introduce Marilyn Underwood and have her maybe as our environmental health director answer that question.
Yes, so just to be clear, compostable toilets are our waterless toilets, which include more than just compostable toilets, are allowed even now in our county, but you'll have to have an adequate septic system to meet, even if you took those toilets offline. So that's when you look around the state, and I've been looking into the K code in other locations, that's pretty much, I haven't found any county jurisdiction that didn't require a full septic system. In some cases, they allowed waterless toilets along with the septic system. In other cases, they didn't. So just to be clear, there are allowed waterless toilets right now. The question is that if you wanted to put in a septic system, I mean, you didn't want to put in a septic system. You only wanted waterless toilets and, say, a gray water system. That would definitely not be allowed under our current ordinance. It's not under our ordinance that we would propose in the future, and probably at this point would not be accepted by this regional board, to be honest with you. And so if you wanted to, you could pursue trying to get your individual system approved by the regional board. Again, I'm not aware of anything like that being accepted in the state, but that would be your prerogative to go that way.
Thanks, Marilyn. I know, Robin, you still have your hand up. I'm going to go to some other questions in the chat just to make sure we get through some of those before we return, if you have another question. Timmery is asking, is this only available for owner builder, or can a contractor assist in the build?
I can take that one. Yes, a contractor can assist in the build.
Okay.
That's a pretty standard requirement, and it's in the residence proposal. I just that was a detail I didn't get into in the presentation. So yes.
Okay. As another question from the chat, as the standards and inspections are lower for the K code compared to a regular fire recovery permit, will K code builds have lower fees than regular recovery permit fees? So I think this is another way of asking the question that Robin had, but maybe Paya.
Yes, so thank you for that, because I should have said that when I responded to a similar question. When you get a permit, you pay specifically for the inspections that you're going to need. And if you're only going to have 4 and not 8, then you will only be charged for the 4. So there is a savings there. One of the hopes is that overall, having a K code will end up with a lower cost structure at the end of the day. Most of that will be because of things you're not going to be required to include in your building if you don't want them, but also the inspection fees will be smaller. So thank you for pointing that out.
Another question that's come up is, if Monterey, and again, this is Paya, this is fees. If Monterey County was able to waive permit fees, why can't Santa Cruz?
Mm-hmm.
Paya, I can answer that real quickly.
Great, thank you.
So we, as Paya mentioned, we lowered the fees to the maximum extent possible. the way Monterey County did it was one, they had far fewer numbers of homes by hundreds less homes, but they just put them through the regular planning department. As same thing happened in Santa Cruz County with the Summit Fire. If we put you all through the regular planning department without having the outside consultants, you all would be waiting in line with everyone else. And so by lowering fees to the maximum extent possible, but having these outside consultants who need to be paid to get here, we are hoping to get you rebuilt faster. So it's a trade-off between time and speed.
Thanks, Supervisor Coonerty. There's a question about what about incinerator toilets? And those are, yeah, I don't know if Marilyn, you're familiar with those.
So, yeah, and I that's why we refer to waterless toilets rather than composting toilets, incinerator toilets. It covers all of those in what I was describing before, in the requirement to allow them, but that you still need a full septic system.
Thank you. And then do we have access to the current draft of the county proposal? So maybe Paya, if you want to reiterate the process from today moving forward and then answer that question as well, or David.
Sure, maybe between the two of us, since David, I don't have the table with all of the dates in front of me, but really this is so we're here to answer questions and also hear from you about preferences. Then the next step is for us to put together a draft code. We bring that code to the board. The draft is published along with kind of an explanatory letter the week before the board meeting. At this point, we don't have so much time that we think we can float the draft, quite a bit more before the board date, because we also, of course, have to put it through our legal review. But as soon as we have a draft and in preparation for the board date, it will be published. And if yeah, so that and opportunity for input continues, because that board hearing will, of course, be a public hearing. The board date that we are planning is, I believe, April 13th. And that will be the next sort of official step in this process, is that the board will consider the draft and decide whether to approve it or amend it and approve it. And then there's a second hearing, a second reading at the board meeting after the one where they take that step of approving it.
And so, I mean, I guess I could just add to that, the agenda materials for that April 13th board meeting would typically be made available the afternoon of the 8th, and definitely on the Friday, the 9th of April. So that's the typical publication date for items that are going to be on the board agenda the following Tuesday.
Thanks, David and Paya, on that one. Melena Powell asks, the K code requires that the county only charge fees related to actual costs. Will county residents be able to see how Santa Cruz County is assessing the cost of giving a permit? Many questions about the fees, but
yeah, fees are really primary for people. So all our fees are based on the time that it takes to do the work toward reviewing and issuing a permit. So you will be able to see a listing of the fees that you've paid, and they're all based on time spent. That's a legal requirement. We can't do it less, and we are not allowed to do it for more. And then some specifically are itemized, such as building inspections. So you will be able to see all that.
Thank you. The question came up, is the county looking at other areas affected by the fire to allow the use of the K code?
The board directed planning to look at the last chance area first as a pilot. I think that we're already hearing that people are interested in having it apply to other areas, specifically other parts of the burn area. And if the board wants to extend it at some point, they can. They could do it after the pilot. They could do it really at any time. And I do expect that will come up for discussion on the 13th. You know, if it's decided that it is extended geographically, then we'll make sure the code applies to all the places that the board wants to include.
Holiday Smith, I hope I'm going to read this, and if there's any questions that Paya has, maybe you can clarify if need be. But Holiday asks, can homes be rebuilt as legacy homes, even if they cannot be built in the same location in order to meet setbacks and other requirements? I don't know if you understand that question. I don't entirely, but
I think I do. I think the caller is responding to the Legacy Structures program, and really, so let me explain that one, because I think it might be actually super helpful for people in Last Chance. Before the county had a zoning ordinance in 1957, permits were not required. So if you have a home that was not permitted and it's pre-1957, then you are able to rebuild, or even, you know, if it's not related to a fire, you can rebuild it or change it, or, you know, whatever you like. And still, if parts of your structure don't meet current codes, you could rebuild it in a way that still doesn't meet current codes, because you have certain rights that go along with having a legal structure, even though it doesn't have a permit. And so the board has taken that date of 1957 and moved it forward, so that if your home is built 1986 or earlier, it is considered to be legal non-conforming, whether or not you had a permit. So if your home that was destroyed did not meet setbacks, and there's some reason you can't meet setbacks, then you would have the ability to put it back without meeting setbacks. You would not be able to increase the unconformity or the ways in which the home doesn't comply with current codes. But if you needed to recreate it and some codes were not met, that is what legal nonconforming means. So I think that's going to be pretty helpful to some people with homes that are 1986 or earlier. And if I didn't answer the question because I didn't understand it, maybe you could clarify in the chat or raise your hand.
Thanks, Paya.
Can I, yeah, if I could just ask, if you had, you know, well, I'll just speak specifically to our property, 3 homes on a property, and one of them meets that legacy requirements, but specifically was within a stream setback, is what you're saying, that home could be rebuilt in that exact same location, and then the other homes would need to follow the current guidelines. Am I reading that correctly?
So it's actually a little, it can get complicated and site specific. So I want to put that caveat in front of anything general I might say, because the environmental codes in Title 16 are a little bit different. And what that means is if that home doesn't meet the current riparian setback and it was built pre-87, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I feel like I can't say anything that's I know is accurate without knowing more about your specifics and like what year and what the code said then. So I don't see your name. Is this Malia?
No, it's Holiday Smith.
Oh, Holiday. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask if you will contact planning offline of the meeting, because I would like to answer your question, but I don't feel like I can do it justice here. I think I might say something that turns out not to be right. So I think you should.
On Thursday already, so I will.
Okay. All right. So thanks for bearing with me. That's one of those specific questions.
All right. Thanks, Holiday. We have a question from John Hamilton, who's getting into the details of the coastal requirements. And I know we talked at length about this in our first rebuild community meeting. So I don't know if we want to get too deep into the coastal regs, but they're asking, it's hard to follow a little bit, but regarding ADU only, or what level of review, level 4 or a public hearing for a coastal permit would be required, or if there's special consideration if you're just building an ADU or a new accessory structure. There was those thresholds, Paya, that were discussed at that first meeting. So I don't know if you wanted to get into that or if you recommend them just reaching out to the RPC.
I would recommend just reaching out to the RPC, but I also will say that there is a program just for recovery that says if you're building a new ADU, so you're not replacing one, but for the first time you're building an ADU, that does need a coastal permit, and it will be processed as a level 4, and I'll decode that. It would normally be a level 5, which would mean it needs a public hearing. But we've worked it out with the Coastal Commission that they'll agree for fire circumstances, because new ADUs are helpful to people to live in while they get the resources to do a primary structure, that those will be processed at a level 4. So that means there's not a public hearing in that case.
Thanks, Paya. I'm just going to jump back. Robin, you still have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a second question, or is that hand raised just from your first question? Robin Hilliard.
No, I've been trying to hang up.
All right, I wanted to just make sure.
It says raise hand. No, I'm wondering about Forrest and Jessica though. Their hands are up, so I'm wondering why they aren't being called.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing.
I see Paul, Langan, and Forrest and Jessica.
Yeah.
All right, there. I see Forrest and Jessica. Thank you, Robin. I appreciate that. I don't know why I wasn't seeing that. So Forrest and Jessica, why don't we have you ask your question?
Sure. I put one question in the comments there because I didn't know what was going on, but I'll ask a different question, which is with respect to the money issue that Robin brought up. I'm wondering if, I understand that the county needs to pay for the staff and the folks to, get us through this process quickly. But I'm wondering if the county would consider reducing the appraised value for a period of time after rebuild, such that they can still collect, some money based on the raw land value, and allow a break on the new appraised value to cover some of these costs associated with this very high fees for rebuilding, which are way beyond what the fees that would have been charged back in the day if people had built then.
Thanks, Forrest. I don't know, Paya, if you want to answer that or.
Sure. I don't know whether that has been considered by the assessor and the offices that deal with property taxes or not. I do know that they have programs for reducing taxes after a disaster. I don't know for what period of time that is. I do know that they have a way that is favorable to calculate taxes on a rebuilt structure relative to what you had before. There's some kind of, you get some sort of credit. If you're building something that's different or bigger, I think, you get credit at you pay taxes at the lower rate for the amount of square footage that you had before the fire. So they've looked at it in different ways. They have some programs. And then beyond that, I'm going to refer you directly to the county assessor.
Paya, I'll just add, so I've been working with the county assessor to both lower people's property taxes based on the fire, as well as what you said, which is to ensure that they're essentially grandfathered in at their previous tax rate. We couldn't do what Forrest recommends because that would be illegal under state law, because it'd be a gift of public funds to basically credit one group of people against property taxes for the other. We're just there's no way to do it legally under law.
Thanks, Ryan.
Sure, thanks.
Thanks, Forrest. The next question is about the K code, and I think it's important maybe to just remind people the distinction between building and zoning code. But the question is, how does K code see two homes on a single large lot? Does it have the concept of a primary and ADU?
Yeah, I'll take that. So the K code is an alternate construction code, and it can apply to a main house or an ADU or to some kind of accessory structure or outbuilding. So from that point of view, it applies. And this gives me an opportunity to address something that I'm anticipating is a question, because in the last chance neighborhood, there's a lot of parcels that have more than one dwelling on them. And people are asking, can we put all of those back? And that gets back to whether they were legal and whether, if they weren't straight up legal, whether they fit within the 1986, the legacy code, which allows us to treat them as if they were legal. In those cases, they could be put back, even if the zoning code would not allow more than one dwelling. Now, the zoning code does have something called a dwelling group, and you can, in some cases, get a discretionary permit, which is a planning permit that would allow more than one dwelling. I don't have the details of that at my fingertips. I know we don't do them very much, so it's, I think, pretty limited, but there's a possibility that some of these places will qualify to be a dwelling group. So those are some things to consider if you've got more than one house on a parcel.
Thanks, Paya. The next question is CAL FIRE the agency that signs off on an individual parcel's meeting the fire safety requirement? Do we know if there's a broad concern for our whole community because we are at the end, we are on a dead end road, or will we only find out on a case by case basis? I don't know.
I can talk about how the fire code gets administered a little bit. And so I would say there, ultimately, it is parcel by parcel. This is going to be an answer that is going to sound inherent, contradictory, but it's ultimately parcel by parcel because each building permit gets reviewed by the fire agency and a determination is made whether it meets the fire code or whether it can be made to meet the fire code in some way. So it's parcel specific from that point of view. But also, most of your parcels are in the same circumstance on the same road. And that really argues for some kind of collective solution, if possible, to the challenges. And we've been kind of talking about this since, shortly after the fire, wondering whether there are ways for the community to organize, possibly with county help, possibly with the resilience office's help, to work together to try and bring the road up to standard or closer to standard in a way that homes could then have, be found to meet some minimum standard. So that judgment call does sit with the fire agency, which in your case is County Fire. But as far as organizing and trying to make some sort of group solution to the difficulties, I think that there's some real merit to pursuing that. And if residents have the wherewithal, the county will work with you about that, because it's a situation you're all in together, really. Driveways have individual circumstances, but the road in is a communal issue, and it's an infrastructure issue.
Thanks, Paya. The next question from George Martinez. Can you please address the use of spring water? And I don't know if Marilyn, you want to talk at all about.
So spring water is allowed. It does have slightly different production rate requirements. It does still need to meet bacteriological and chemical requirements. The one thing I would say is that it's not necessarily an environmental health issue, but the spring might have to produce enough pressure for a fire code if that's required. So that might be an issue with the spring water.
Thanks, Marilyn. Let's go to Susie. You raised your hand.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up to the fire safety question. So I understand the recommendation is that we find a communal, as a community, we look for solutions. If we have not yet identified what the problem is, it's hard to start looking for solutions. So would the recommendation be to find out what position CAL FIRE has, what their assessment is currently, so that we can know how to move forward?
I think connecting with CAL FIRE is a very early, that's a very early step to take.
Okay, thank you.
The next question from Forrest said, given that the residents of Last Chance had sufficient water production to support all properties, will the county reduce the production requirements in the county code, which requires 1,440 approximately gallons per day, which is more than 20 times the average per capita usage in Santa Cruz? I don't know, that's maybe Maryland
question. Yeah, it is. At this time, and again, the K code would still need to follow our ordinance code for well and well production or water production, and it would need to meet those requirements.
Thanks. If the county's proposal to limit K code to burn structures, would K code apply if the burn structure was proposed to be relocated? And I'm assuming that's just to a different location on the same property. And so I think the answer is yes. You could apply the K code if you were choosing to build in a different location.
Yeah, you could relocate it to a better position on the property, presumably, as long as it continues to meet the required setbacks from property lines and other resources.
Yeah,
and there may be instances where we would prefer you to move it to a different location, just a better spot on the property. So that's a pretty general answer.
Yeah, like for example, going back to that question about the home by the creek, in general, we would prefer that a rebuild of that home be relocated further away from the creek if possible. That's one general requirement we'd be looking for in a situation like that.
Thanks, David and Marty. I'm going to skip, there's a couple statements in here. I'm going to just leave those right now, try to get to as many of the questions as we can. In regard to the definition of owner built, we prefer that the 1-year definition be used. People have complex lives. In the aftermath of this disaster, we are reluctant to hamstring residents any more than they already are. Victims should have flexibility and options and not be punished for our homes burning down. So I think that's that 3-year owner builder versus 1 year to sell or rent. So I think that's just feedback. Maybe I don't know if there's a question there that you guys want to answer.
Well, I'll say that we'll definitely consider that and look at it from your point of view for sure.
Well, let's see. We had another spring question. I think we answered that. We're concerned that the county's proposal to require recording of information may impact residents' ability to finance rebuilds and refinance existing loans. If this is required, we may eliminate our ability to use this code due to lack of funds. That's a good question. I don't know if we have the finance. It's definitely something I was going to look into, but I don't know. I have not had a chance. So Paya, I don't know if anybody has, or David or Marty, on the financing with a K code built home.
Yeah, and we certainly don't want to create inadvertently a new set of problems. On the other hand, there's a lot of reasons for having the deed reflect what is the case. So we will look at whether that is an issue, and if it is, we'll see what to do about it. So yeah, David and I had discussed working on that. So thanks for bringing that up. We will look at that.
For those who had spring water questions, Cheryl Wong, who's also works with Maryland, gave an answer in the chat around spring water requirements, so you can take a look there. Susie asks, many homes do not have a history of paperwork with the county. How will people come up with proof that the home was there prior to, and I think she means 1986?
I can address that. So, you know, the gold standard really is if your existing home had been assessed by the, you know, by the assessor's office, and they have records on a lot of properties that were not permitted because they don't look at that when they keep their records. So the first place we would look is your assessor's records. We'd look if the planning department has any records. If we didn't have any of those, then we start looking at other, you know, creative options. Did you have home insurance, and can that validate the date? We can look at whether you had a refi or a mortgage, and maybe that will validate the date. So we'll look at whatever you can come up with that is, you know, reasonable documentation that the home existed.
Thank you. I know that you've been asked this question before, Paya, but is there a ballpark model number for what you're looking at for permit fees?
You know, the fees that are the largest component of the overall fees are based on the square footage and the kind of space it is. And so that's why it's really hard to just say in general, this is the ballpark. We did take one swing at that. And we took kind of a standard 2,000 square foot house somewhere in Bonnie Doon, and we applied what the fees were in order just to illustrate which fees are charged and which fees were being waived or not charged. And that's available. The board date that has that example is November 17th. And we could maybe we could post that board letter somewhere that's more accessible to you. But that's really the best we can do, is take some typical circumstance and give you a ballpark idea for that circumstance. And then you can judge what you're doing, you know, your project relative to that average project.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, the Recovery Permit Center will have a free conversation. There's no charge to have conversations and consultations with them. And you can bring a back of the napkin level of detail to that conversation to try and to get more information. So you're not required to have anything formalized or finished in your vision for how to rebuild, but they're a wealth of information. They have a tremendous amount of experience, and I know many of you were on the prior calls with them. But for those who are interested in those specifics, they're gonna be your best resource to give you some of those answers as well. Let's see, there's a number of Cheryl's trying to get back to some of the spring questions, so hopefully folks are following that in the chat. Let's see, Joe C, are you taking into account that the Last Chance community has been sustainably living in the mountains for 50 years? Why do you think your plans decided in the last 6 months will protect our forest in a better way? So I don't know if that's a good, I don't know. I think I'll take a little bit of a stab at that in terms of the fact that I think, you know, we are looking from the resilience side of things, you know, how to address hazard mitigation. And so we are looking at things to do where possible with grant funding from the state and federal level to address resilience as it relates to hazard mitigation, as well as climate change impacts.
All your answers have been very vague. You haven't, not one question has really been answered. You guys, it's pretty much been a statement from you guys, and we've just been absorbing it. And we ask questions, but I don't feel that most of the questions that I've heard asked have been answered in a manner that really properly gives us an answer. And so, I mean, I'm just wondering why you wouldn't be willing to work with the local community. before revising and finalizing any plans that really, you know, ensure our future.
Dave, let me answer that if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I think, look, the reality is that for most of Last Chance, the previous permitting system historically sort of didn't work. Coming out of the fire, we recognize that many people may rebuild without going through the permitting system. But we are limited, as was explained, under state laws and guidelines about fire code and septic code and water code, things the county doesn't have control over. So what we're looking at is, within that framework of all these laws, can we create a path for people to get back, to get a permit and get rebuilt? I don't know if we can, but this is our best effort within the limits that are set around us by all kinds of state laws and requirements over what we can do. So I fully recognize that for a lot of you, this still won't work for a variety of different reasons, but this is us pushing the boundaries of what we're allowed to do under state law and codes and waiving fees and everything. We're pushing it as far as we can go in the hopes that it'll work for you, but it may not.
The other thing I'd like to just highlight for everybody, you know, is that as the staff person that's trying to help in the recovery and rebuild process for the OR3 office, there are additional resources available and we want to connect you to the long-term recovery group and identify what your unmet needs are in terms of, if you had health insurance, if you had homeowners insurance, how much was it for, and how much will that help you in the rebuild process, where your gaps are, and if there are state or federal resources that we can bring to support your recovery. We want to be able to do those things. But the Recovery Permit Center is going to be permit and process driven, but the long-term recovery group and the resources there are going to be able to hopefully identify supplemental resources to helping you in the rebuild process. So please stay connected. This is not the last time we'll have a conversation, but that resource is coming online here in the next couple weeks. And what we want to be able to do is connect everybody that is going through the fire recovery process with that group, and they're going to be the ones that will help identify what you can do with your existing insurance. If you don't have insurance, how we can hopefully help you as well. So I just want to remind folks of that resource as it comes online. Let's see. There's a couple questions about the planning department's proposal and being able to compare it to what's going to be presented at the board in April. Is the intent to have the ability to compare the two, or a bulleted description of the differences between the two, Paya or David, as you prepare for that meeting?
I can take that. Yeah, I mean, well, one of the main things we're trying to do is get to the earliest meeting that we can, so that this proposal gets going, you know, as early as it can. So we've kind of squeezed the time, and we're not going to have a lot of time between getting through all of our channels so we know we have a real draft that's publishable and the date when it gets published. So I think what I can offer is, you know, we've kind of tried to talk about the comparison as we went through the slides on the main points. You know, I think the main places are the 1 year, 3 year that I see people are talking about in the chat, and the recordation, and maybe David can speak to any of the other places where it's different at the moment. But we're not going to have a publishable draft that you can compare sheet by sheet. I don't think in time for you to do that. you'll be able to do that at least when the draft is out the week before the public hearing. And if I can think of some other way to assist with that, I will, but that's where we're at the moment.
Well, and since this would be a new chapter of the county code, we would not be producing an underlined strikeout form.
There's nothing to compare
format.
it to.
So there's nothing in the county code to compare it to for an underlined strikeout forms. But what we could do is provide some separate document that would compare the two, the county's version to the extent it's different from the residents' proposal. Just so people would have an easy way of seeing the differences without having to go through it line by line.
We could certainly have that in the package so that it's clear to people when they look at the board package what the differences are.
Yeah, and again, we have this established process that an ordinance needs to go through in order to get onto the board's agenda, and that involves county lawyers and the county administrative office, and then the agenda is published. And so it's generally items that are going to be on the board's agenda don't get published earlier in that process than everything else. So everybody sees the final results at the same time, including the supervisors and the public.
This is true. Thanks, David. I know that Cheryl's been trying to answer as many of the questions on the spring water in the chat, but there's one question here in terms of, can you clarify whether the water supply regulations are at the county or state level? And if the county could look at the level and modify production rates, provided perhaps they met water storage capacity requirements for fire. But I don't know if Marilyn, you have that answer regarding spring water and whether those regulations are a county or a state or regional water board.
Right, so production values are at the county ordinance level, but also in turn supported by, or in turn mimic, if you will, state requirements under the state. But we can definitely look into that, whether or not it can be done locally if there's any modifications.
Thank you.
Dave, there are some people who have their hands up.
Yeah, why am I not? I apologize. I'm not for some
people.
reason.
Paul is the first one.
Thank you. I don't know what's going on my side. Yeah, why don't we have Paul go ahead then?
If not Paul, Susie has his hand. Susie has her hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to follow up and I'm wondering if somebody decided to rebuild an illegal unpermitted structure and didn't request any permits whatsoever, what would the consequences be?
I can answer that. Well, I mean, they would be what the code says they are now. They wouldn't be any different, which is that if construction that doesn't have a permit is found while it's underway, then frequently a correction or sometimes a red tag is issued until a permit is gotten. And if it's completed, then if at some point we come across it or there's a complaint, then a code compliance process is instigated.
So thanks. Let's try and grab these other hands that I missed. I apologize again. Paul Bodo Langen. Paul Langen. Why don't we try Dawn Harris?
Yes.
Wait, 1 second. Can you hear us okay?
Is that Paul? Yeah, go ahead, Paul, and then we'll go to Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes.
Who are you calling on?
My house was is very old, one of the early structures, and it was permitted then for 900 square feet. But then an owner later extended on it with a bedroom and foundation and whatnot for a garage. How would that be handled?
That's pretty common. I'm trying to think about what the Recovery Permit Center is doing with those now. You have a building permit, just all of what's there is not necessarily permitted.
Right.
Yeah, so
that's what it is.
Those get to be pretty individual, but you know, the basic message is that we're going to work with you to do the best we can to, well, it'll be, you know, more straightforward to be permitting the part that you can show had a permit, and then you can do additions or have something larger go back than you had there before. So if you're coming in for a permit now, that may not be very much of an obstacle at all, because it was previously not permitted. But if it, you know, meets its clearances and there's a basic level of health and safety, then you can get a building permit for it. And it's not necessarily related to what you did or didn't have a permit for before.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Don, thanks for your patience there.
Yes, I want to go back to the question of a septic tank requirement for a compost toilet. I presume that that's made for the presumption that somebody might eventually take out the compost toilet and go to a flush toilet. But it seems to me you could assert that you won't, and if you do, that would require going back and getting another permit. And I wanted to add to that the fact that I have awareness that in other counties, there have been much smaller gray water systems, effective, but of much smaller magnitude, that have been approved by the counties. So it can be done.
Don, I'm happy for you to share which counties you reached out to, and all the ones that I've reached out to, especially in regarding K housing in particular, that they are all unequivocally require a full septic system, even if people want to put in a gray water system. So I'm happy for you to share counties that you've found. If you want to put that in the chat, that would be great. I'm certainly happy to chat with those. That's part of my effort, was to reach out and find if there's other places that are doing it. I will say my general understanding is too that all the counties that all have to have these local area management plans are reflecting what the state is allowing under their minimum standards, and that's not something they're embracing at this time without a full septic system. So, but I'd happy to research it if you can provide those counties.
Well, the county that I'm particularly aware of is Mendocino County, and
that's unequivocal. I can show you an email I had with the director there today, environmental health director.
Well, this is going back some years when I was aware of this, so it may have changed.
Yeah.
But it's still predicated on the assumption that you're going to do that. And the problem I have with that is any rule that you have is predicated on, for example, the size of a house. You could add 3 or 4 rooms later, and that would change everything. Well, putting a flush toilet in would change everything too. And so you should be able to say, well, I'm not going to do that. And if I don't, then the amount of black water you're putting into the system is so dramatically reduced that the need for that kind of a gray water system is really superfluous and very expensive.
Yeah, and I think it all goes to, Don, I really appreciate the thought here, and I do feel like, just like we're talking about how somebody wants to only have to, own or occupy it for 1 year, that is part of the concept here, is these things are very intense. You have to deal with your own poo, your own waste, and it requires you to be involved in it. And so that's not necessarily something that the next owner is going to want to do, or, to be honest with you, the same owner in a 2 to 3 year period. And that's been the experience. My understanding is, even in this county with compostable toilets, is the service just really is not kept up. And again, that's it, when that intense, it's human sewage is a very important public health concern. And again, no county that I've reached out to, including Mendocino, does not require a full septic system, even if they allow waterless toilets.
So just to confirm on Dawn's behalf, you would need one permit for a composting toilet, and then if you decided to go to a flushable toilet later, you'd have to get a whole new permit and go through a whole nother set of regulations. Is that correct?
So when you rebuild, you would be required to show to us that you have a full septic system that had the required number of ways to deal with your black water. And if you wanted to add a compostable toilet or another type of waterless toilet, you could as an additional feature, but it's not necessarily going to substitute for what you already need.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
We had another question, hand raised from MKOK, M. Cock. Coke. I don't know if they want to unmute and ask their question. All right, let me see. We're almost done with we're almost to 7 o'clock. I do want to recognize a couple questions that came up and just around fire access and grant funding and having that larger conversation. And I think that the supervisor's office and myself have discussed, sitting down more specifically around this issue and having another community meeting where we can discuss creative solutions, whether there are state or federal dollars to help you in that effort. So certainly through the supervisor's office and the OR3 office, we want to reach out and have another neighborhood scale meeting with the folks out at Last Chance because you have such a unique situation in terms of the dead end nature of it. And you've done a lot over the years to maintain the roads that you have, as well as we do know that the debris removal process is doing some work that may have some benefits long-term as well. So I don't want to get too deep into the fire component right now, but I recognize that in the chat, and I'm happy to organize another conversation around that, and then maybe we can also at that time invite some of our CAL FIRE folks into that conversation so that we can have a good one. I will share with you that there is a new Board of Forestry meeting on March 22nd. We will be looking and watching what comes out at that meeting, but we do expect a Board of Forestry set of regulations to have a 45-day review and comment period for the public as well as the county. And so as soon as we are aware of that draft document that's available for public review, we'll be letting everybody know countywide, and certainly folks out at Last Chance, we want to let you know as well, so that we can all have a unified voice if we need to make comments regarding those proposed regulations. There is a couple more questions, and then we'll try and wrap up just for everybody's time. As it relates to the county's proposal that a generator not be a sole source of power, if an owner decides not to electrify their home and does not have PG&E, solar, or hydro, would the county prohibit use of a generator for other purposes? We believe this should be allowed.
I'll let Marty or David take that one.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, the issue that we've seen with generators is they can be, if not maintained correctly, they can be dangerous. If you were going to use a generator, we'd prefer that there was some kind of a battery backups or a battery system there that you could charge with the generator, so it wasn't running all the time. But yeah, that's kind of our thoughts behind generators. Is that if not maintained correctly, they can be dangerous.
Thanks, Marty. One other question that Forrest brought up, they'd like to point out that the map, that some of the parcels that had structures burned in Last Chance are not reflected on the map that David shared. And so I don't know if that map that David shared is consistent with Maryland's debris removal program map. But we can certainly look into that. And if Forrest, you know of some of those, please go ahead and reach out to Paya or David as listed, yeah. And we can try and figure that piece out.
Yes, reach out to me with any information on a parcel that had a burned structure that's not on that map. And I have not compared that map with the debris removal progress map. And I intend to do that to see where we might have some mismatches there.
Yeah, there's a number of questions that are getting into the fire piece. I do want to recognize that our long-term recovery group lead, Tricia Wilshire Potts, put the email contact information in for the Santa Cruz Long-Term Recovery Group, and I just want to vocalize that for folks. That email address is santacruzltrg@gmail.com. So if you email santacruzltrg@gmail.com, you can be added to the contact list and be made in, you can be updated as newsletters and information come out from the long-term recovery group. At this point, what I may do is just is we can go through, and if there are any other missing questions that we didn't get a chance to, I can try and cull those out, and we can try and address those. But I certainly welcome you've got the contact information here for those folks, Paya, Martin, and David. And again, the resource or the Recovery Permit Center is a great place to start some of your conversations. This will not be the last neighborhood meeting we have with Last Chance. And I welcome those future conversations as well, and trying to get into the weeds of fire access and fire safety with all of you. And with that, Paya, is there anything you want to say in closing, or Ryan, or anybody?
Ryan, did you have anything?
Sure. I just want to say thank you. And I also, as the Last Chance folks know, please feel free to contact me in my office anytime. We're happy to, there's a lot of information that came at you tonight, and it's going to take a little time, I think, for you all to talk and just digest it. And so feel free to always reach out to me. I also do encourage you to go to the Recovery Center and, talk through. You don't need a formal application. You can just sort of talk through your particular property's, issues and questions. And a lot of this is really property specific. So it's good for you to go and just have those conversations and try to get a sense as to where things are and where the stumbling blocks may be. And then my office is happy to work with you on what some of those challenges may be.
Yes, and I would just like to close with a couple of thank yous. Thank you very much to all of the community who participated, to David Reed, to Dave Carlson and Martin Heaney, to the supervisor's office, and to Amy Wilbanks, who's been at the other meeting fielding people back to this meeting this whole time. I just want to echo what Supervisor Coonerty said. Please reach out to the RPC. That's why they're there. They will have conversations without it being, specifically permit related. And, that's what they're here for. So please use them. And thank you all very much for the input that you delivered to us. And Malia, for your organizing. Really appreciative. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night. Thank you so much for all your work.